Chapter 6. At the Motel 6 near Flemington, New Jersey, Hal Ambler used the slain man's Nokia to place a number of phone calls. First was to the U.S. Department of State. He could make no assumptions at this point. He could not know whether his relation to the intelligence unit in which he had spent his career was one of friend or foe. He could not use the emergency numbers he had memorized as an operative in case that triggered a tracing mechanism. Instead, it would be safer to knock on the front door. Accordingly, the first call he made was to the State Department Communications Office. Pretending to be a reporter from Reuters International, he requested that he be connected to the office of Undersecretary Ellen Whitfield. Could she confirm a statement that had been attributed to her? Her assistant, to whom he was connected after a number of intermediate relays, was apologetic. The undersecretary was traveling, part of an overseas delegation. Was it possible to be more specific? The Reuters correspondent asked. The assistant was sorry, but she could not. An overseas delegation. No doubt the information was accurate. It was also essentially useless. Ellen Whitfield's official designation as an undersecretary in the Department of State blandly concealed her real administrative charge as the director of the Political Stabilization Unit, his boss, in short. Did his colleagues think he was dead, mad, vanished? What did Ellen Whitfield know about what had happened to him? The questions eddied in his mind. If she did not know, she would want to know, wouldn't she? He struggled to recall the period of time just before he had found himself a captive in a psychiatric penal colony. Yet those last memories remained opaque, encased, inaccessible, hidden within the fog that had eclipsed his existence. He tried to inventory what he could recall before that fog settled in. He recalled the few days he spent in Nepal, visiting with the leaders of a group of self-identified Tibetan dissidents who were seeking American assistance. They were dissembling, Ambler swiftly concluded. In fact, they were representatives of a Maoist insurgency that had been repudiated by China and banished by Nepal's own struggling government. The stab operation at Changhua commenced thereafter, preparing for the removal of Waichan Luang, and then his mind was like a torn page. There was no sharp line separating recollection from oblivion. Rather, it feathered irregularly to an end. It was the same when he tried to push back his memories of Parrish Island to before the final months. So many of his earlier memories were fractured moments, stripped of any sense of time or sequence. Perhaps he needed to go further back, before the weeks surrounding his abduction, to the time when his memories of his life were vivid, continuous, were as real as the ground beneath his feet. If only he could find someone who would share those memories, someone whose reminiscences would provide the corroboration he desperately needed, the assurance that he was who he was. On impulse, Ambler called directory assistance for Dylan Sutcliffe in Providence, Rhode Island. Dylan Sutcliffe was someone he had scarcely thought about for years, someone he'd met half a lifetime ago. He had met Dylan when they were both freshmen at Carlisle College, a small liberal arts school in Connecticut, and they hit it off at once. Dylan was a cut-up with a gift for gab and a great store of tales about growing up in Pepper Pike, Ohio. He also had a pronounced weakness for pranks. One morning in late October, it was their sophomore year, the campus woke up to discover that an enormous pumpkin had appeared on the spire of McIntyre Tower. The pumpkin had to have weighed nearly 70 pounds, and how it materialized there was a mystery. It was a source of merriment among the students and consternation among the administrators. No maintenance worker would agree to risk his neck in order to bring it down, so the pumpkin was left to make its way down by itself. The next morning, a cluster of small jack-lanterns appeared at the base of McIntyre Tower, positioned as if looking up at the big pumpkin overhead. Some of them bore signs saying, "Jump!" The undergraduate glee only heightened the ill humor of the college officials. A few months before graduation, 2 years later, when the administration was no longer so exercised, the word finally went around that the class had Dylan Sutcliffe, an expert and well-equipped rock climber, to thank. Sutcliffe was a prankster, but a prudent one. He never directly owned up to it and had always appreciated Ambler's discretion. For Ambler, having noticed something in Sutcliffe's face when the matter was discussed, was the first to guess that he was behind it. And though he let Sutcliffe know that he knew, he never told anyone else. Ambler remembered the Charlie Brown-style shirts Sutcliffe favored, with their broad, colorful horizontal stripes, and his collection of clay pipes, seldom used, but more interesting than the usual undergraduate collection of beer bottles or Grateful Dead basement tapes. Ambler recalled attending his wedding just a year after graduation, knew that he had a good job at a Providence community bank, once independent, now part of a national chain. "This is Dylan Sutcliffe," a voice now said. Ambler did not immediately recognize it, but he was overcome with warmth all the same. "Dylan," Ambler said, "it's Hal Ambler, remember me?" There was a long pause. "I'm sorry," the man said, sounding confused. "I'm not sure I caught your name." "Hal Ambler. We were at Carlisle together 2 decades ago. You were in my sweet freshman year. I was at your wedding. Coming back now? Been a long time between drinks, huh?" "Listen, I don't buy things from strangers over the phone," the man said curtly. "I suggest you try this on somebody else." Could this be the wrong Dylan Sutcliffe? Nothing about him sounded like the Sutcliffe he remembered. "Whoa," he said. "Maybe I got the wrong guy. You didn't go to Carlisle then?" "I did. It's just that nobody in my class was named Hal Ambler." There was a click as the man hung up on him. Roiled by a mixture of anger and fear, he now called Carlisle College and got himself transferred to the registrar's office. To the young man who answered, Ambler explained that he was a human resources officer for a major corporation, prospective employer of one Harrison Ambler. As a matter of corporate policy, they were verifying certain items on the applicant's resume. All he had to do was confirm that Harrison Ambler had indeed graduated from Carlisle College. "Certainly, sir," the man from the registrar's office said. He asked for the spelling and entered the name. Ambler could hear quiet, swift clicking from a keyboard. "Sorry," the voice said. "Could you give me the spelling one more time?" With a growing sense of apprehension, Ambler did so. "I guess it's a good thing you called," said the voice on the phone. "He didn't graduate?" "Nobody by that name has ever matriculated here, let alone graduated." "Is it possible that your database doesn't go back far enough?" "Nope, we're a real small college, so that's one problem we don't have. Believe me, sir, if this guy was enrolled here at any time during the 20th century, I'd know." "Thank you," Ambler said, his voice hollow. "Thank you for your time." His hand was trembling as he pressed the off button on the cell phone. It was madness. His entire sense of who he was. Could it be a phantasm? Was that possible? He shuttered his eyes briefly and allowed the countless memories of his 4 decades to surge and spill and swirl in his mind, yielding to a free and unstructured flood of association. There were memories beyond counting, and they were the memories of Hal Ambler, unless he truly was mad. The time exploring his own backyard as a young child, that he stumbled on a subterranean nest of yellow jackets, how they spurted from the ground like a black and yellow geyser, and he wound up in the emergency room with 30 stings. The hot July and summer camp, learning to do the butterfly stroke in Lake Canandaigua, and catching a glimpse of breasts when one of the camp counselors, Wendy Sullivan, was changing in a portisan with a broken door. The August he spent, age 15, working in the barbecue restaurant of a fairground 10 miles south of Camden, Delaware, learning to ask customers, "Would you like some of our fresh corn on the cob with that?" when they'd only asked for the plate of spare ribs and mashed potatoes. His earnest after-work conversations with frizzy-haired Julianne Dachis, who was stationed at the Friolator, about the difference between heavy petting and light. There were less comfortable memories as well, some having to do with his father's departure when he was 6. and the weakness both his parents had for the solace of the bottle. He remembered an all-night poker game he played during his freshman year, how the upperclassmen especially grew uneasy with his steadily growing pile of chips, as if he had found some undetectable method of cheating. He remembered, too, a sophomore year crush at Carlisle. God, the breathlessness of their early encounters, and then the tears, the stormy recriminations and reconciliations, the lemon verbena fragrance of her shampoo, which had seemed so exotic and which for years afterward could still leave him stricken with nostalgia and yearning. He remembered his recruitment and training at consular operations, his trainer's growing fascination with his peculiar gift, his cover job at the State Department's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs as a cultural exchange officer, someone who was regularly stationed abroad. All these things he remembered with clarity and precision. His had been a double life. Or was it simply a double delusion? A throbbing was building in his head as he left his room. In a corner of what passed for the motel's lobby, an internet-enabled computer was available as a minor amenity for guests. Ambler sat down in front of it and, using a passcode held by the State Department's Analytic Bureau, logged on to the newspaper database LexisNexis. The local newspaper at Camden, where Ambler grew up, once ran a small item about him when, as a sixth grader, he won the county spelling bee. Enthalpy, dithyramb, hellebore. Ambler spelled them all fluently and correctly, establishing himself as the best speller not only in Simpson Elementary School, but in Kent County. When he made a mistake, he always knew it immediately, knew it from the judge's expression. His mother, who was by then raising him by herself, had been inordinately pleased, he recalled, but more than a child's egotism was involved now. He ran the Nexus search. Nothing matched the description. He remembered the Dover Post item so clearly, remembered how his mother cut it out and kept it on the refrigerator door with a magnet designed to resemble a slice of watermelon, kept it there until it yellowed and started to crumble from the light. Decades worth of the Dover Post was on LexisNexis, an archive of all sorts of local news about who won and who lost in the city council elections, about layoffs at the Seabury Hosier Company, about capital renovations at City Hall. But as far as Nexus was concerned, Harrison Ambler did not exist. He did not exist then. He did not exist now. Insanity. The airport was the familiar jungle of terrazzo, steel, and glass, with the familiar air of a fully staffed facility. Wherever one turned, one saw airline employees, airport security officers, and baggage handlers, all wearing badges and uniforms of various sorts. The milieu, Ambler decided, was a cross between a federal mail-handling facility and a resort town. He bought a ticket to Wilmington one way, $150, the cover charge, so to speak, of the rendezvous. He looked as bored as the woman at the ticket counter, who stifled a yawn as she stamped his boarding card. The photo ID he submitted, the Georgia license altered to display a photograph of its current bearer, would not withstand close scrutiny, but it received none. Gate D14 was at the very end of a long walkway and adjoined two others in a radial array. He glanced around. Fewer than a dozen travelers were visible. It was 2:30. The next flight at any of these gates would not be for another 90 minutes. Within half an hour, more people would arrive for a flight to Pittsburgh, but for the moment it was indeed a dead period. Had the person he was to meet already arrived? That seemed likely, but who was it? "You'll know who I am," the message had said. Ambler walked around the various seating areas, taking in the stragglers and early birds, the plump woman feeding candy to her plump daughter, the man in the ill-fitting suit thumbing through a PowerPoint presentation, the young woman with piercings and jeans she had marked up with different colored felt-tip pens. None of them were contenders. Ambler's sense of frustration began to mount. "You'll know who I am." Finally, his eyes alighted on someone who was seated by himself near a window. It was a turbaned S-I-K-H, capital S-I-K-H, gentleman, moving his lips as he read USA Today. As Ambler walked over to him, he noticed that there was no evidence of any hair underneath the turban. Not a single stray strand could be seen. A faint gleam of adhesive on the man's cheek suggested that the full beard was recently applied. Was the man really moving his lips as he read, or was he communicating on a fiber-optic microphone? To anyone else, the man would have seemed perfectly settled, bored, and still. To Ambler, he seemed anything but. On instinct, Ambler swiveled and stepped behind the seated figure. Now, with a lightning-swift movement, he grabbed the man's turban and lifted it up. Beneath it, he saw the man's pale, smooth-shaven P-A-T-E, and taped to it with a fabric bandage, a small Glock. The gun was in Ambler's hand now, and he let the turban drop back into place. The seated man remained stock-still with the tactical immobility and silence of a highly trained professional who knew when the prudent response was not to respond. Only his raised eyebrows registered surprise. The whole soundless maneuver had taken no more than 2 seconds and had been concealed from anyone's view by Ambler's own body. The pistol was oddly light in his hand, and he recognized the model at once. The body was made of plastic and ceramic. The slide contained less metal than was found in a typical belt buckle. The odds that it would set off a metal detector were low. The odds that the security guards would interfere with the Sikhs' religious headdress were even lower. A tube of bronzer and a yard of muslin cloth, the cheap, efficient costume. Once again, the skill and efficiency of the rendezvous inspired both admiration and anxiety. "Bravo," the fake Sikh said in a low voice, a faint smile pulling at the corners of his mouth. "A fine defensive move, not that it changes anything." He spoke English with the perfectly enunciated consonants of someone who had received instruction in it abroad, albeit from an early age. "I'm the one with the weapon. That doesn't change anything? In my experience, it does." "Sometimes you make best use of a weapon by giving it up," the man said, his eyes almost twinkling. "Tell me, do you see the guy in the airline uniform standing at the gate counter? He's just arrived." Ambler glanced over. "I see him." "He's with us. He stands ready to shoot you, if that proves necessary." The seated man looked up at Ambler, who was still standing. "Do you believe me?" The question wasn't a taunt, but a point of inquiry. "I believe he'll try," Ambler responded. "For your sake, you'd better hope he doesn't miss." The fake Sikh nodded with approval. "But then, unlike you, I'm wearing Kevlar just in case." Again, he looked up at Ambler. "Do you believe me?" "No," Ambler said after a beat. "I don't." The man's smile widened. "You're Tarquin, aren't you? The package, not the delivery man. You see, your reputation precedes you. They say you're devilish good at reading people. I needed to be sure." Now Ambler took the seat next to him. The meeting would be less conspicuous that way. Whatever the man had in store for him, it wasn't a quick death. "Why don't you explain yourself?" Ambler asked. The other man extended a hand in greeting. "The name's Arcady. You see, I'd been told that quite a legendary field agent, alias Tarquin, might now be available." "Available?" "For recruitment. And no, I don't know your real name. I am aware that you seek information. I do not have that information. What I have is access to that information, or rather access to those who possess the information." Arcady cracked his knuckles. "Or access to those with access to those who possess the information. You will not be surprised to learn that the organization to which I belong is carefully partitioned. Information flows only where it must." As he spoke, Ambler watched him intently, concentrating. Hopefulness sometimes obscured perception, he knew, and so did despair. As he had regularly explained to colleagues who were bewildered by his gift, we don't see what we don't want to see. Cease wanting, cease projecting, just receive the signals that willy-nilly are being sent. That was the key. The seek before him was a lie, but he was not lying to him. I have to say the speed of the invitation is puzzling, Ambler said. We don't like to waste time. That's something we have in common, I'd guess. One punctual stitch obviates 9, such as you Americans say. In the event, the squawk went out yesterday morning. The squawk, trade jargon, an alert that had been radioed to all the country's intelligence services, had gone out on, quote-unquote, the squawk. The channel was used when urgency overrode secrecy. It was a leaky form of communication. A message sent to that many ears was liable to reach a few eavesdroppers as well. Even so, Ambler said, I think you can connect the dots. Clearly your admirers have been waiting for this moment. Quite likely they had hoped to recruit you even before you disappeared from view. And no doubt they think they have competition for your services. They don't want to let the moment pass. Clearly, quite likely, no doubt. You're speculating. You're not stating for a fact. As I told you, information is strictly partitioned in the organization. I know what I have to know. I can surmise a certain amount beyond that. And of course, there is a great deal I must be content not to know. The system works for us all. It keeps them safe. It keeps me safe. But it doesn't keep me safe. One of your guys tried to kill me. I very much doubt that. The large caliber bullet that grazed my neck would beg to differ. Arcady looked bemused. That doesn't make any sense. Yeah, well, the southern guy looked pretty surprised too, the moment before the bullet traveled on through the back of his head. Ambler's voice was a low rasp. What kind of a crazy goddamn game are you guys running? Not us, Arcady said, almost to himself, he murmured. This sounds like a case of interference. It just means we weren't the only people to hear the squawk and respond. Then you're telling me there was a second party involved? There had to have been, Arcady said after a long pause. We'll do the analysis, make sure there's been no breach, but it very much sounds like a parasitic visitation, so to speak. It won't happen again, not once you're with us. Is that a promise or a threat? Arcady winced. Oh dear, we really have gotten off on the incorrect foot, haven't we? But I tell you this, my employers would very much like to keep you safe, so long as they can be assured that you will do the same for them. Trust must run in both directions. That they can trust me, Ambler said steadily, is something they'll have to take on trust. But that's the one thing they never do, you see. Arcady sounded apologetic. Such a bore, I know. They have another idea. In fact, they want to kill 2 fowl with 1 rock. They have a little job for you. For the first time, Ambler could hear the diphthongs of the man's native tongue, which was obviously Slavic. Like an audition. Exactly. Arcady's eyes lit up. And it's all terribly win-win, as my employers like to say. The job we have for you is small, but ticklish. Ticklish? I won't lie to you. What would be the point? He beamed. It's a small job, but it has defeated others, yet it must be done. You see, my employers have a problem. They are careful people, you'll see, and you'll be grateful of it. As the maxim has it, birds of the same plumage seek out one another's company. But maybe not all their friends are quite so careful as they are. And maybe a penetration agent made some inroads with some of their confreres. All that coruscates is not gold, alas. Maybe such an agent, having collected some evidence, is about to testify in a legal proceeding. All very messy. A penetration agent? Let's be clear. You're talking about an undercover federal agent. It's awkward, isn't it? Arcady said. ATF, in fact. If the investigator was with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the investigation quite likely involved gun smuggling of some sort. That did not mean the organization Arcady worked for was involved in the trade. Confreres was the word Arcady used. The obvious assumption was that the gun runners who supplied the organization had been ensnared. One day this man will die, the fake Sikh went on contemplatively. A stroke, a heart attack, cancer, who can say? But like all of us, he is mortal, and one day he will die. We simply wish to place a rush order on that eventuality. That is all. Why me? The Sikh made a face. This is so embarrassing, really. Ambler just stared. Well, the truth is, we don't exactly know what he looks like. Occupational hazard, right? The person he had direct dealings with isn't in a position to help us out. Because he's dead? The reason is irrelevant. Let's not get distracted from the big picture here. We've got a venue, we've got a time, but we don't want to take out the wrong person. We don't want to make a mistake. You see how scrupulous we are? Some people would just machine gun everyone in the vicinity, but that's not our way. Mother Teresa, watch your back. I'm not saying we're in competition for sainthood, Tarquin, but then you aren't either. His dark eyes flashed. To return to my point, you'll be able to tell at a glance who the mark is, because being the mark, he knows he's marked. That's the sort of thing you'll be able to pick up on. I see, Ambler said, and he did, or was beginning to. Some sort of rogue outfit wanted his services. The job discussed was indeed an audition, but what they needed to establish was not his ability to read people. No. By killing a federal agent, he would be proving his bona fides, proving that he had severed all loyalties to his former employers, not to mention conventional morality. They must have had reason to believe that he was sufficiently embittered and disaffected to entertain the assignment. Perhaps they were misinformed. Perhaps, though, they simply knew more than he did. Perhaps they knew, as he did not, exactly why he had been committed to Parrish Island. Perhaps he had cause for grievance far beyond that of which he was aware. Then do we have a deal? Ambler thought for a moment. If I say no? You'll never know, will you? Arcady smiled. Maybe you should say no, and resign yourself to ignorance. There are worse things. They say that curiosity proved fatal to the feline. And that satisfaction brought it back. Not to know was the one thing he could not survive. He needed to know, and he needed to serve justice on those who had tried to destroy his life. Ambler glanced at the blue-jacketed man behind the gate counter. I think we can do business. It was madness, and it was the one thing that might save him from madness. Ambler recalled from some long-ago classroom the Greek legend about the labyrinth of Crete, the lair of the Minotaur. The labyrinth was so intricately twisted that those imprisoned within could never find their way out. But Theseus had been aided by Ariadne, Ariadne, who gave him a ball of thread and tied one end to the door of the maze. By following the thread, he had made his escape. At the moment, this man was the closest thing Ambler had to a thread. What he could not know was which end of the maze it would lead to freedom or to death. He would chance either rather than remaining lost in the maze. Finally, Arcady began to speak in the tone of someone who had committed precise instructions to memory. At 10 a.m. tomorrow, the undercover agent has a meeting scheduled with the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. We believe that an armored limousine will bring him to the corner of 1 St. Andrew's Plaza near Foley Square in Lower Manhattan. He may be accompanied, part of a group. He may be alone. Either way, it will be a rare interval of vulnerability. The agent will have to traverse an extended pedestrian area on foot. You must be there. No backup? One of our people will be there to help. At the appropriate time, our person will pass you a weapon. The rest is in your hands. All we insist is that you follow the instructions exactly. I realize this is like asking a jazz musician to follow the notes on a score rather than improvise, but in this instance there can be no improvisation. How does that American expression go? It's my way or the thoroughfare, right? Yet another English idiom he had obviously learned in his native tongue. The double translation was exacting a considerable toll. The plan must be respected in its particulars. It's highly exposed, Ambler protested. A lousy plan. As much as we value your particular expertise, Arcady said, you must grant us ours. You don't know the facts on the ground. My employers do, and they've studied them. The target is a cautious man. He isn't skulking under bridges for your convenience. This is actually an extraordinary opportunity. We may not get another for a long time, and then it will be too late. There are dozens of potential problems, Ambler persisted. You're free to walk away, Arcady said, a glint of steel in his voice. But if you do complete the assignment as per instructions, you will be introduced to someone up my line of command. He's someone you know, someone who has worked beside you. Someone, then, who might well know the whole story of what had happened to Harrison Ambler. I'll do it, Ambler said. He was not thinking ahead, was not thinking about what he was agreeing to. He knew that if he let this thread drop, he might never find it again. Ariadne's thread, yet which way did it lead? Arcady leaned forward and patted Ambler's wrist. From a distance, the gesture would look affectionate. Really, we don't ask so very much, only that you should succeed where others have failed. It wouldn't be the first time. No, Ambler mused, but it might be the last.